Those who say I despise people do not understand me. So says Ulrich Seidl, Austrian cinema's master of the uncomfortable. A bug-eyed and oftentimes relentless fly on the wall, Seidel's cinema is characterized by its lingering, unblinking gaze into the passions and poisons of Austrian society. Men who look for love in the shape of Men who look for love in the shape of FilipinoBrides.com, women seeking sex tourism and sex satisfaction on the beaches of Kenya, documentaries and dramas, though for Seidl, the real and the fabricated are not easily separated from each other. Love, its need and its absence, is the overriding theme of much of his work. Flabby, unsimulated, awkward sex, mustachioed men in their badly lit bachelor pads. He's been called variously a misanthrope, a voyeur, a social pornographer. But deep cuts are hard to confront. After all, this is not an easy pill to swallow if you're Austrian or, well, simply looking for something to be filled, figuratively or not. So what is this cinema exactly? And what's Seidl telling us about our needs and desires, about being human? Is he chuckling, empathizing, or is his hand down his pants? Joining me to discuss Seidel's work, as ever, is Ralph Pritchard. Ralph, are you signing up for Seidel's Lonely Hearts Club?
I did sign up for this past 7 days, and I was very surprised that Seidel's work moved me as much as it did, because I saw one of his more well-known fiction art features, Import Export, when I was about 20, and a combination of it not really being a very good film and me being incredibly resistant to anything abject or like sort of ugly in
because you want to be uplifted and moved.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I was very into Tarkovsky, and I was very into like beautiful images and uplifting things.
This can be more different from
exactly. And so I found Seidel's. I saw that film, and I read about Seidel's other work, and I just thought, this is like, not something I want to look at. And so it came as a huge surprise to me that his work felt suddenly very relevant and important to me. It was you last week on the podcast who said that cinema is necessarily a medium of discomfort, and I feel like we've kind of picked the perfect director to explore that. I guess I'll just outline the three films we reviewed. The Last Real Men, which was a TV documentary lasting only an hour, about one particular man who is divorced from an Austrian woman, and he lives on the outskirts of Vienna, and he's looking for love, and he's interested in procuring a Filipino mail order bride, and he asks lots of other men like him who have gone through with that and appear to be quite satisfied with the choice, and has lots of conversations with them about what the role of a woman is in the family and what he's looking for, and it follows his journey. The second film we watched was Animal Love, which is a feature-length documentary with fictional elements, I think, which kind of revolves around lots of different subjects who live with animals, and their relationship towards the animals border on bestiality quite closely, to the point of being bestial. It's a pretty horrendous but hilarious watch. The level of ugly and concerning material in it. And then thirdly, we watched Paradise Love, the first in a trilogy of films based on the sort of trinity of emotions: Paradise Love, Paradise Hope, Paradise Faith. Paradise Love is about I'm going to borrow your word, a portly, pasty Austrian woman.
No. Full figures.
Who, again, unlucky in love in her home country, decides to seek pleasure, if not full romantic fulfillment, in the subaltern in Kenya, where there are, it appears, many willing lovers, but of course the power dynamic and the privilege only go so far in mending her heart.
Yeah,
and it's pretty uncomfortable. But they're all pretty uncomfortable.
They're all uncomfortable. He trades in discomfort, right? And one of the, it's in the introduction when I was talking about him having various criticisms leveled at him. It's true. There's an element of the grotesque. There's an element of the kind of freak show almost. He is presenting the way. Let's talk about his cinematography actually, because he's got a very composed lens. He loves a tableau, a kind of static tableau of people maybe facing a camera. It's almost like a kind of American Gothic, the famous American Gothic painting. It's like that. He's got people facing the camera. Handheld camera is relatively limited compared to these more static scenes. They can be very beautiful. They can be incredibly beautiful in the ugliness, but the grotesque is there. And I suppose in Real Men, The Last Real Men, it's played for humour. Really, it's Real Men is less obviously abject than Animal Love or Paradise Love. I was about to say Paradise Lost, which would be appropriate, but like. Yeah, Real Men, but all these films, they're all stitched together, but they're instantly recognizable in their banality. They're very unrecognizable, and the unrecognizability actually kind of knits them together as being his kind of like underplay. He's like an underplayed auteur almost.
He's often accused of being mannered. That's when people don't like his films. They say that he's becoming a parody of himself, is what they say. Yeah,
it's almost like an Adam Curtis of Austrian iniquity in a way. The thing is, we don't have his voice. We have, and his voice comes through in form, which makes him a total formalist actually, because he is there, and he is, because when I was saying to you the day, one thing about him is that Seidl's films, the relation, the kind of blurry boundary between the documentary and the drama is very uncertain. It's very hard. If you were to watch a series of scenes from, say, Paradise Love and Real Men, it would be, if you had no knowledge of him at all, never watched his films, it would be really difficult for you to separate which was the drama and which was the documentary. It's really hard to do because they have a similar kind of almost ad-lib. He uses a lot of amateur actors. Obviously his documentaries are all amateur actors, but his documentaries also have a lot of quite staged scenes in them. We're talking about Real Men. And one thing he really highlights is the kind of inability for these men to really be homemakers for themselves and to care for themselves. The main character, who is seeking a bride, claims that, I do care for myself. I wash. I'm the woman of the household. But he's living in very Spartan, quite depressing surrounds. Like one motif that keeps cropping up is him cooking his dinner, which is obviously a kind of an artful fabrication in a way, because it's always him slapping a can of a kind of ravioli in a tin into a fucking aggressively heated pan. And that image keeps cropping up of him, a new day, a new can of fucking gross food, and him eating.
It's like that proof rock. I've measured out my life with coffee spoons, and he's measured out his life with tinned food.
These men are lying out like the patient etherized on the table, indeed. And I think there's but there is something, exquisitely postmodern about it, and I use that sense in a very kind of because they are self-aware, self-knowing films, but they are depressing. Like the overall energy you get from it is the Austria of the 1990s that he's presenting and of the early 2000s is a uniquely bleak place. It's a room with confusingly pebble-dashed walls and a plastic chair in the corner. No personal artifacts really. It's a very kind of drab, monotonous world that he presents. So there is an element of exploitation in his cinema. Do you think he's exploiting these people in his documentaries? Because in one sense, he's being a total humanist. He's saying, I'm showing real life and real people and their needs. But the other times, he is framing them with his camera in such a way that does make them look kind of absurd and grotesque, and their lives look very pitiful.
I mean, there's definitely a reason he picks the people he picks, right? Because they do reflect a version of life. They're not perhaps typical, but they are perhaps the logical conclusion of certain tendencies. An additional film that I watched by Seidl was a documentary about him by Konstantin Wolf, and also this documentary he made, partially fictionalized documentary called De Busenfreund, which means the booby friend. And it's about this. I was
going to joke saying that, but it's true.
And it's about that's the funny thing with German, is often the weird thing you think it means, it does mean that.
That's so German. Der Booby-Freund, is schlanker.
But yeah, so there's this guy, René Rupnik, who I feel like is a good person to wheel out in terms of talking about Seidl and exploitation. He first appears in René Rupnik. He's this retired maths teacher who is kind of obsessed with the most sort of factual way of saying it without putting any of my bourgeois judgments on the situation is he's a maths teacher and he's obsessed with boobs, and he talks a lot about boobs, and most of Der Börsenfreund is him standing in front of a sort of scribbled out maths blackboard, talking about how much he loves young women with large breasts, and how he finds women with small breasts sort of disappointing and depressing, and it's
like A Beautiful Mind, but if Russell Crowe were a tit man rather than an arse man. That's
he literally goes into every detail about like how like he sort of says, and then the women, they have the bum as well, and the bum is kind of like good, it's like breasts, but it doesn't smell so good, and they're different size, and they don't have nipples. And he just goes through this. It's really hysterical.
The anatomy of there's something deeply autistic about the people he chooses are kind of socially maladaptive. Yeah, like that. I mean, I think the booby friend is particularly egregious in that respect. But like his other films, he chooses people who are socially maladaptive, aren't necessarily, I think, aware of the way they come across being quite unusual. Obviously, like I said, there's an element of artifice there. The form of his shooting contributes to that. I think if it was a handheld proper fly on the wall documentary style, I think these people would kind of come to life in a different way.
Absolutely,
yeah. It adds an element of gelatinous
it actually gives people more rope, which feels kind of like, because he often when you see him in the making of a documentary, he stands to get these wide shots. He stands quite far away from them. And they're often naked or half naked, and he gives them that lot. I'm sure he shoots for quite a while. He gives them quite a lot of space to condemn themselves. But he doesn't condemn them.
No, it's kind of the Herzog style, because Herzog's famous for leaving a camera on his interviewees for quite a long time. And he lets them kind of go through. They always see them bridge through it. They say something. Then they'll go through a bridge of silence and discomfort, and then they'll say the thing they really want to say, and that's kind of Herzog's kind of métier. That's his kind of flourish. That's what he's known for. You watch any Herzog film, it's hard to describe, but you see a Herzog film, you know when he's doing that, and then he'll say something completely out of the fucking blue that will knock them over, and then they'll say something even deeper and what they actually should be saying. And he's very good at like getting through the sublimated desire to the real desire, and that's the thing about Seidl. He gets to the sublimated needs in a different way, and it's more formal than Herzog. And it is, all these films are about sublimated, in Animal Love, it's about people's love for their pets, a sublimated sense of loss and need and desire that's unfulfilled. In The Last Real Men, it's they are seeking, the film, they're all getting Filipino brides because they believe that the name of the film is kind of misleading in a way, but they want to be men, and they feel women should fulfill kind of natural, as it were, kind of social and kind of patriarchal roles, maternal roles. Whereas
the modern
in reality,
working world emasculates them, doesn't it?
emasculates them, and they are emasculating men because they're kind of losers, which is the implication of the film. And they believe that the word they use is that women are too emancipated in Austria, but it might be that they're kind of almost too poorly adjusted in a way to participate in the romance game or to participate in love, which again is, and it opens up a space where Seidl is being both empathetic and kind of judgmental, I think.
But I don't think I think he does well not to sort of humiliate that. I mean, there's a quote.
If people humiliate themselves, they do it themselves. But
There's a quote relating to the booby friend from the documentary where he says, "In my opinion, this crudeness exists within all of us men." And he's talking about this man standing in front of the blackboard, talking about how he talks about women with small breasts, and he says, "Oh, I try to reassure them, but of course I know that they are lost beyond redemption." And it's like this immense,
it's true, that's right,
this immense kind of judgmental and behavior, sort of like, and he's this guy, he lives with his mum, and his mum at the end of the film has a massive go at him for being an incel, and basically says, like, he's like, "Oh, but I guess I have platonic love," and she says, platonic love doesn't get you anywhere. Like, she just has a massive go at him and then dies in the next scene. She doesn't actually die, that bit was staged, but which gives you some insight into like the way
he's
he
really
works with
really
real subjects.
telling. I think because like we said, one thing he also does is he doesn't give as much context about the people in his films that they don't give us. So he gives us kind of visual clues about what's in their apartments, because he's not heavy on location shooting. I think Animal Love is more location heavy, but it's often kind of tight, wide shots within tight rooms, if that makes sense. Which creates quite a kind of claustrophobic feeling in the shot. And there's little, you kind of look in I was pausing the film kind of looking for personal effects, and there's very few. You get the sense of these men living in a kind of vacated, abandoned space. Maybe there were kids before them. That they're sublimating their real needs. So in Last Real Men, these men are looking for a kind of real wife that will look after them and cook for them and clean for them. And it's not even sexual, actually, and I'll get onto that in a minute. But they're almost looking for like a mother figure. Whereas what they really need is kind of deeper than that. It's a sense of belonging and meaning and nurture, which they can't provide for themselves because they're kind of adrift in the modern world. And when I sort of talked about sex, because the main character in The Last Real Men, the main device of the film is him meeting other men who have used kind of mail-ordered-brides.com and interrogating them, as it were, about what it's like. He's got questions. Do they know how to use the dishwasher? Do they, will they cook for you? Do they expect pocket money? He's got these questions. The men often are kind of they hang themselves on their own rope in a way, because sometimes certain ones of them will say kind of particularly gross things, as it were, about the women, but at the same time they kind of do pull faces when it comes to more sexual questions or questions about liberation. They're aware that they are coming across in a particular way, whereas the character that he's chosen to use as his main kind of lens, the guy who's looking for a wife, is actually more bold than the other men. Like when he kind of talks about sex and things like that, they seem kind of awkward and unsure about it, and they're aware that they don't want to come off in a particular way. They've got a lot more self-consciousness than he has, which is probably why Seidl chose him as his protagonist, because this guy he's very confident in every other area. He's like a judo instructor, black belt, he's like a teacher at school, he's like got his shit together, and
he's also basically a little bit too sensitive. That's why, spoiler alert, like the bride that he settles with ends up like leaving him at the altar, essentially.
Leaving him at the altar, because when he talks
because
to
he
the men,
basically he's not quite fucked up and patriarchal enough to fully like oppress someone. So I think what probably happened, I mean, that bit of the thing is not filmed, so you don't really know how it played out, but
you see it through some photographs that he's taken. But
you essentially imagine that he's just a little bit too cautious, and that caution in him is a sort of recognition that what he's doing is not really quite right.
Yeah, I read that as well as like absence, though, because when you see the other men together with their wives, they're teaching their wives German and they're very present, but I think he's got his whole life beyond the wife. He's just not looking to fill this kind of domestic void, and whereas they are actually trying to seek a kind of fill a psychic wound, whereas he's not. He's literally just looking for a mother, I think, which might explain. I mean, it's quite telling, because he meets this kind of bizarre cast of other men, you know, who are quite likable in a way. Like there's a kind of kindness to their pig-headedness in a way, isn't there? Like there's the big chubby man with the big bags under his eyes, who's quite a kind of jovial character. There's the Harry Dean Stanton kind of super skinny guy with the moustache. There's the super nervous guy who's got the bright white hair and the kind of grey dark black beard and the red jumper, who's quite
the Harry Dean Stanton guy. I'm probably going to look like him when I'm like 70. I just realised that when I was watching it. I was like, oof.
I actually just went on, I just googled mail order brides, and I found a website. So I'm on this is telling me, so what are mail order bride services? This is their like pitch, and to put it bluntly, a mail order bride service is an online catalogue with available men and women who are seeking a loving partner for marriage. These are not dating websites or hookup apps. These are serious platforms built by people who care about the sanctity of marriage and true love. Everyone deserves affection and care. And it's kind of weird, the gap between... I think that's why these men are kind of awkward talking about kind of the sexual component of the relationship, which is definitely present. And it's not like Seidl is uncomfortable talking or showing sex, because we'll talk about Paradise Love in a minute. He's really not shying away from showing and talking about sex. I think it's just for them, there is a deeper wound and absence that they're trying to fill. They've failed in their other relationships. Austria as a whole, Austria is a very conservative country, and family and marriage, you know, I've spent probably a year, I'd say, maybe 9 months in Austria total in my life. Having a tattoo is considered extremely rebellious. You know, like having a piercing is just odd. Like there is a very deep-seated conservatism about Austrian society, and we were talking on WhatsApp the other day about like the kind of psychic wound of processing guilt and death after World War II, as well, which is something that W.D. Siebold talks about, which is the kind of natural history of destruction. And part of the psychic wound of Germany and Austria is the inability of those countries to kind of really openly talk about their war dead and their lost generations and so on, because they weren't allowed to mourn, as it were, the Nazi dead or whatever, the fellow travellers. So there's kind of like a parental guilt vacuum at the heart of Austrian society, and these people in this film are kind of like the children of those people. You know, so I think they're kind of the sense of arrested development is quite present.
So they're the most repressed, the most kind of retarded. The
most repressed, yeah.
In the most kind of basic sense of the word, like there's a delayed kind of development in terms of their like emotional 100%. Faculties.
Did it make you feel like, I don't know? I just felt so. I won't lie. I felt revolted by the world I was looking at in The Real Men. What was your feelings? Did you feel? I felt
I'm
real.
Glad
like
you asked me this. I felt discomfort. Like it was the most uncomfortable bit. I think was trying to explain it to my flatmates afterwards, because I basically
you watched it together.
No. I watched Animal Love with my flatmate Keith. That was really fun. I think when you watch a Seidl film with someone else, then both of you can kind of like roll around in the filth of it and kind of get it, and the complexity of it comes across really easily. But when you sit in your study, as I did, and watch an hour-long film about really lonely dudes in Austria getting Filipino mail order brides, and then you try and explain to someone like why you looked at that corner of the internet and what was significant about it, it is hard, because basically the film doesn't judge or like condemn these people. The film gives you the opportunity, if you want to condemn them. There is one character, I think it's his sister or a friend, who's like quite short-haired and progressive, and she's sort of like, what the hell are you talking about when he's saying?
Who is she? Is she a friend or a sister? I got the impression
I thought sister, because I thought he wouldn't really be friends with someone who so disagrees with his worldview. I thought it's probably some family member. But she sort of is this kind of, for me, a voice of reason. But I like to think this film, excuse me, like when you, like this film is open to being watched by people who might be more similar to the guys in this film. And it doesn't kind of condemn, it allows this honesty to flow in a way that isn't judgmental, and basically the emotion that is uniting these people, all of the people in his films, I would say, is loneliness and the need. I think they're fucking immature and retarded, and it's creepy as hell to order a mail order bride, but the need they want to have fulfilled, like a sort of dependable sexual and domestic mate who won't like undermine them. I mean, that is like really desirable, obviously. They're
very fragile, right?
Yeah,
like these men are like,
put yourself in that's not what everyone in this society wants, but put yourself in their shoes. Like, that's totally understand. Like, you have a greater totally understanding.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone else tells you, I just watched this film about guys ordering mail order brides, it would be very easy to be like,
because I remember watching a Channel 4 documentary about it years ago, probably like during like the golden age of Channel 4, when it actually did good documentaries. It was like the era of Stacey Dooley. It was like they had it was about men who were going to Thailand, in this case, rather than the Philippines, to look for brides, and it was more about the kind of logistics of these men going out. And these men were all kind of Gary Glitter vibe men, like really creepy and weird, and it was English. And I think because I knew the context of English men, I could kind of pinpoint it better. But like, obviously this film, you come away with deep revulsion about Austrian society. I apologize to Austrian readers, but fuck, man, like the overwhelming picture you get is a really dark thing. And you know, it's the same with and you're right about loneliness. These films are knitted together by loneliness and people who are desperate to feel that loneliness, and they're maybe sublimating it for other things, you know. Talking about kind of, I'm looking for a wife that can, care and iron for my clothes. They're actually sublimating like a real loss and absence in their life that isn't being fulfilled by modern life itself, or by the idea of the sanctity of marriage, or the idea of success. Because these men are, they have boring but large homes and cars, and they're obviously successful in the ways that Austrian or kind of Western European society thinks you're successful, sort of petty bourgeois individuals. None of these people are dirt poor, none of them are super wealthy. They might be the professional classes, kind of teachers or sort of maybe lawyers or land surveyors, that kind of thing. That's the impression you get from them. And you come away with this sense of deep loss and yearning. And the big question,
what is happening in a society where people feel the need to get a mail order bride? Because it's not even like a backward. Obviously, arranged marriages have a history and stuff, but like the healthy thing in almost any society is to naturally meet someone, and get along with them. I don't know. The idea of buying someone who've never met before with the explicit intention of spending the rest of your life.
Because the power to that, especially from the colonies, it's not like this is a service where I'm going to meet someone who's on the same page as me and we're going to get married because we're both in the same headspace. It's, the
you're working with a pre-existing colonial dynamic.
Absolutely, because the thing I'm going to say is like the dictum is that the frontier always returns home, and that's meant not often in like a political biopolitics way of, say the policing practices of America and Iraq and Afghanistan will return home to surveillance capitalism, the surveillance state in America, but it also means a kind of not neo-colonialism. It's like a postmodern colonialism, which manifests itself in the flow of information and people through the internet, which is here manifested as mail order brides. And it shows that the Germans or the Belgians or the French or the English who went out and conquered the world, the frontier is now collapsing back on them, and they're shown to be deeply hollow. It's a predictable conundrum, in many ways. And I don't think it's representative of a whole. I think it is interesting when we're talking about Austria. We watched Melina by Werner Schroeter, and we've watched Michael Haneke. We've watched this rich seam of Austrian. Very well represented on YouTube. This rich seam of Austrian post-war Austrian culture, which is obsessed with basically the abject, and deeply harrowing scenes. That the thing that unites all of those is, this is horrible, I can't look away, which is what Michael Haneke is. It is what to an extent Melina is, Mona Schroeter's Melina, although that is the most kind of high class of these things, it revels in the opera and the literature, Austria being very literary operatic society, right? And it's seen here in Ulrich Seidl, this obsession with the fly on the wall, because they're like, they're saying, what the fuck is going on here? Like,
just briefly, I think the distinction between, like last week I was making the important distinction between Noé, who I think is playful and enthusiastic and sometimes gauche, versus Von Trier, who I feel is like cynical and nihilistic. I think even though they make films that are quite similar on the surface. And I think this week my distinction of choice is Seidl versus Haneke. I feel that Haneke's work is tinged with a sort of nihilism and a kind of attempt to judge the audience, and an attempt to use cinema to create a discomfort that is exploitative of the viewer, and I think carries with it a bunch of assumptions about who's watching. I might be wrong there. Haneke might disagree with me there, but that's what I think. Whereas Seidl, I think, has a much more democratic approach to who he depicts.
A humanist, you're saying?
Humanist, yeah. And I think, and that's why John Waters likes him, and John Waters hasn't expressed a profound passion for Haneke, unsurprisingly. But yeah, I think, and with Rupnik, just to pick up the bosom friend maths teacher, Seidl has worked with him numerous times since, and kind of dramatized bits of his life in future films such as Paradise Faith and in a play he was doing. So I think there's a commitment to these weirdos that he picks up in the same way that Waters picked up Divine and people. There's this idea of a menagerie. Maybe he's a bit like a circus ringleader or something, but I think that does have a seam of a history of some level of compassion and identification.
Compassion and empathy. I think it is there because he's saying, whereas Haneke is, Haneke's task is to make us feel uneasy and to exploit our emotions. The feeling with Seidl is that he's just trying to present things and in as neutral way possible. I don't know how he could really be more neutral. Yeah, that's true. In a lot of ways,
the aesthetic, the sort of symmetrical wide shot has a kind of.
What do you do?
It's an aesthetic of neutrality in a way. Even though nothing is neutral, but it is going for that.
Exactly,
right?
And he embraces that by having these clearly kind of fabricated moments in his documentaries, which is his way of reminding us, that this is a documentary, but the camera, the observation of the lens changes people and it changes the relationship. And he says there's a power dynamic. He's acknowledging it through the form of his films.
There's a lot of trust. I think with Seidl, you do have to trust him quite a lot. I can imagine someone losing trust with him and then it all falling apart. But I think
people really don't like, his. I was looking on Mubi and looking at the listing of Animal Love. It's not on Mubi, by the way, but they've still got the reviews and shit. And it's like a scatter of like 2 stars, 1 stars, maybe 3 stars at a push. It's I couldn't stand it. High camera angles, casting choices, which is interesting because it's a fucking documentary that's saying casting choices. All bring out the grotesque in humans in a facile, misanthropic automatism. Someone else is like, one observation hammered down with such ineptitude and desire to shock that the result is probably one of the most boring films ever made. Shocking and boring in the same sentence. Someone else called it 3 out of 10. Regular.
That's amazing.
Grotesque and overly obsessed with its socially nihilistic, atrophied human behaviour, which really seems to fascinate Seidl.
They're really telling on themselves, these movie
They're telling on themselves, because people are seeing this and they're going, I'm uncomfortable with what human need is and human desire. We're all sublimating. And
they're basically the popular kid at school, or not the popular kid at school, they're like almost popular kid, the sort of in-betweener.
The try-hard.
Yeah, not quite like the bottom of the pile, but not quite the top of the pile. Like
and then because they're in the middle, they're
trying to say, well, obviously I would never.
From the lower.
Exactly. They feel more anxious to distance themselves from the people at the bottom of the pile.
The top.
But they're not sort of as secure as the people at the top who wouldn't need to.
Yeah, and they're not aware they're in a fucking pile. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about Paradise Love, because we talked a lot about The Last Real Men. Paradise Love is a drama. Remind us all about the kind of the context, the kind of narrative, whatever.
So Paradise Love is essentially, it's part of this trilogy. The sequel is kind of about a woman. They're all kind of family members. The sequel is about a woman, the auntie, who's kind of like becomes a rabidly Christian and then sort of abandons her faith. And then the third one, which I was thinking of watching, but I couldn't really be asked, was about the daughter of the woman in Paradise Love who is a bit chubby and goes to a fat camp and is groomed quite heavily by the guy who runs the fat camp. So yeah, discomfort. If you want more discomfort, there's that film. But no, it's a good Paradise Love. Paradise Love is essentially like a kind of a compliment to The Last Real Men, but instead of being about a man, it's about a woman. And instead of it being a kind of import of a colonial subject into Austria, it is an Austrian traveling abroad to Kenya.
It's about Dommelturns, if you put it in that way.
About what?
Dommelturns.
Dommelturns, yes, exactly.
Yes, yeah.
And so basically, as you can well imagine, she goes to this African country and everyone greets her. All these very impoverished people greet her with a huge enthusiasm, which she can't help but be flattered by. And very quickly, she gets the sexual desires for which she's travelled to this country gratified. But there are sort of strings attached, and there are kind of lots of uneasy moments where people are trying to sell her things, and then people are trying to sell themselves to her, and you can kind of see that they, she can hardly believe that someone would want her for herself. Exactly. Yeah. So she kind of comes. It's the same dynamic, the same white person dynamic of being like, oh, what have I got going for me? I guess I'm white, which then gives me a few, and I'm rich, so that gives me that puts me up in the pecking order where before I wasn't. And so they have this advantage when they go to Kenya. These white, there are other women who are already there who she meets up with, who are generally a lot more relaxed about what they're engaging with than her. Again, the main character of this is someone who's a little bit more cautious about what she's engaging with, and therefore there is more kind of dramatic tension when she does engage with it. She's kind of got a bit too much of a heart and too much of a self-awareness to really kind of follow through. Although she does follow through fairly heavily, seduces a lot of dudes. And it leads to a lot of very difficult to watch situations. But also, this can't be overstated. However, I think they are made more uncomfortable by the initial titillation and the sort of excitement, and there is like a kind of I wanted to link this back slightly to Painted Bird, because I realized when I was talking about how Labina in Painted Bird was kind of an attractive actress, and I sort of admitted to I think one of my main critiques of the Painted Bird was that titillation was used quite cynically to intensify the more abject sequences. So Labina is really hot and sexy, and you're really turned on by her, and then suddenly she's like being a paedophile and engaging with bestiality, and it's like that. It's sort of, you're led down the garden path a bit. I think that happens here, but in a much less cynical way, in a much more I think natural, honest way. In that, when this film starts, you do find that there is some kind of flirtatious sexual excitement, and then the real kind of power infused discomfort, and it's not so much the bodies involved, it's more the politics, I feel. It's
the shifting sands of their power dynamics, because when she travels to Kenya, it's unclear whether she's aware that Kenya is a sex tourism destination, or whether she's kind of almost groomed into realizing that by the women who are presumably regular travelers there for this reason. I mean, there's an element of both, and the ambiguity is quite useful. But she is fundamentally a sincere, to begin with, quite sincere, sympathetic character who's quite embarrassed by the obvious kind of maybe blind to the ulterior motive of the men who are interested in her, and are interested in her because of what she represents, which is money and wealth and security. When she has her first kind of sexual encounter, it's a failed sexual encounter. It's a very uncomfortable, she's taken to this kind of uncomfortable, quite grim hotel, love hotel basically, by this local Kenyan guy. He's quite aggressive. I'm not saying it's kind of a rape scene, not at all, but he's very kind of pressuring, and he's obviously extremely sexy.
She says no quite a few times, and he doesn't really take that on board.
He's kind of like, come on. It's like he doesn't take no for an answer. But he's very buff and young. He's probably like 22 or something, and she's like this quite, she's an older lady who's quite, obviously discomforted by her body, and she doesn't have the confidence to believe that she might be loved. One thing he keeps saying to her is, I love you, which is, and she's like, no, you don't lie to me. She's aware of of the cynicism of why somebody might be interested in her.
By trying to run away, but the desperation which drives her to run away from her own sense of low self-esteem ends up drawing that low self-esteem into sharp relief.
Totally. Yeah, it really does. It paints it in very vivid hues.
Unless she's willing to fully pursue a delusion. It's the same with the guys in Lost. But if you're prepared to really delude yourself and be like, yeah, it's fine, this woman will like me because I have money and I don't care. Yeah,
but she's not willing to buy into she's got too much of a heart, and she's not willing to buy into the cynical, transactional nature, which other women in the camp are. It's like, it's kind of resort.
They don't care.
Other women are fully like, I'm the sugar mama, he's young and hot. They kind of joke about the men not really understanding English, and it's fine. But she's got more of a heart. And one thing, when she hangs out with this group of women, kind of midway through the film, she keeps talking about, I want a man to love me for who I am and to look beyond my body. And they're very cynical about that being a possibility. And they're all kind of liberated in their own way. And maybe she's held back by her belief in a kind of higher love, and as it were, like their cynicism is rewarded because they don't feel the guilt and the shame, whereas she's kind of dogged by shame throughout the whole film. She has basically three kind of romantic partners in this film. The first one is the one we talked about. The second one is the kind of longer one, where Munga is kind of a bit more of a wily operator, to be honest, because he's aware that harassing her for sex and money is not going to work. He kind of he kind of placates her, and he kind of offers the negotiated illusion or delusion of transactional love, which is probably what would work for the other women. Like, he kind of pretends he's into her and cares about her and has sex with her. In return, he asks for money. He's quite pushy about money, but not, he's a more wily operator, basically.
But it kicks in actually after a period of time. So they do have like a transaction-free romantic dynamic for a little while before then once she's kind of invested, he says, my sister, we need lots of money, and it's not his sister, it's his bird,
it's his wife. Yeah, it's literally his wife,
which becomes clear.
But you feel really uncomfortable,
and she can't tell the difference, obviously.
No, she can't tell the difference. And there's lots of scenes where she's like, because she's introduced to this kind of seedier side of society in Kenya, and she's kind of this point where she goes to his house, and she's obviously walking through this kind of, she's obviously the only white lady in the area, and it's kind of it's shot in a very kind of very very dark kind of. There's very little light apart from natural lighting. There's nothing. You kind of feel concerned for her. She's not really in any danger, but it's like she's way out of her comfort zone. She gets kind of told to basically fuck off by the wife from the doorstep, and she knows she's been kind of duped, and the understanding was that she would be cynical enough to know that she's being duped and that she can get what she needs out of it, which is sex. But because she's got a heart. Her heart has led her astray, because she's like, but I want more than that. And it's like, but the way this is set up is you're supposed to give us money, you're supposed to give Munga money, and Munga's supposed to give you sex, and everyone's happy, everyone's got what they want, and because she's got a heart, her heart, it can't survive the cynicism of that environment.
But it's also this it's huge discomfort of like, if we were watching a film that was literally about sex work, I think there's like a really important, when you describe this film to people, they might say, oh yeah, like sex work. But it's like, I think the thing that, like, sex work would be very direct, not to say that there isn't like an emotional dimension to sex work, but what there isn't is this pretense of love and this pretense of like devotion and, a kind of a dishonesty about, like a fundamental dishonesty about this is even transactional, because these people are being having the piss taken out of them, essentially. And it's their own fault for doing something
they
absurd.
are. You're fool
like,
if you think that these
their
buff
loneliness,
20-year-olds
their desire that's being exploited.
They're you could call it greed or you could call it desire, and it's their belief that they might find love here in this desperate, poor place is greatly, kind of reflective of their own misunderstanding of what they represent, which is the empire or the frontier, kind of coming home and then leaving home again and going back out to the colonies, and their misunderstanding of what they represent and what they've done. And it's a difficult film. In part, one of the things that lends the film its power is that Seidl used a lot of amateur actors. The boys on the beach, as he calls them, like the men who are kind of... So you've got the resort and you've got the sun loungers. Then the beach has got this kind of string, and there's this guard that patrols up and down the string, a rope. And then you've got the men on the beach who are selling stuff, and they're waiting there silently, kind of ominously on the beach. And you could stay on your side of the wire, and that's the kind of colonial frontier, and she crosses it. And that's when she's harassed, but that's when she's looking for something, right? But she's not able to articulate it. She at one point, she can turn and escape these men. She starts kind of wading through these rock pools, and she cuts a very kind of ridiculous figure because she kind of she cuts her foot on a sea urchin, and she's kind of like stumbling through these weird rock pools, and this guy is just kind of like, it's Mungo, isn't it? He's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah,
and he does show her a real amount of sympathy, because like on the transactional level, he's kind of, at that moment, he's being sincere, at least, and it's kind of like a real insight for her into this world.
And you also have to respect their hustle. It is just like,
absolutely, yeah.
It is
like, why the fuck not, mate? Like,
yeah, it's like what they have to do, which is horrific. But like, and it's just, but it's, yeah, you can just see it's a system. I think one of the cruelest things about colonialism is that it well, to put it in very basic terms, like the status that you are given has no relation to your like true worth. And so for the people on the it's like obvious and well documented that that's horrible for the people underneath the boot who deserve like dignity and a good standard of living and agency. But it also should be pointed out that the people in the boot are also given a kind of wildly overpriced sense of themselves, which ultimately, in some cases, stings them in the ass, particularly if they're disadvantaged in other areas, like they're not attractive or they're not
attractive, not physically attractive. Because I think one of the aesthetic, obviously we're talking about biopolitics again and Foucault, but one of the big motivating drivers of colonialism was the idea that European culture was superior, European bodies were superior, the European body was the embodiment of beauty and perfection.
So what happens when you realize you're not superior? That's like
you're not superior, and you're going out to seek these beautiful. She has got a cohort of beautiful young men at her disposal, almost at the exchange of money. And that makes her uncomfortable, and it manages to be a quite really, really interesting kind of critical bibliography almost of colonialism without having to read Foucault or reading Achille Mbembe or reading any of these kind of foundational texts of biopolitics, because you get that through these relationships. It's very good at demonstrating that reading. It's a very smart, intellectually smart film. With some real moments of beauty and empathy in it. There's the scene where he sleeps with her for the first time, and kind of they have some wine and they have a joint, and then he puts the mosquito net over her, and it's a very beautiful scene where she's composed on his bed. It's like a Venus figure, it's a very beautiful moment. It's
like her body looks kind of beautiful in that moment.
Incredibly beautiful, yeah.
Like her body. That's the interesting thing as well. Like her body is not like the film doesn't make me think she's ugly. No. The film actually reminds me how beautiful, like, fat middle-aged, not fat, like, I don't know, like, kind of fat, but, plump middle-aged bodies, female bodies can be beautiful. And in a way, that's kind of the tragedy of it, is that, like, there's lots of factors out of her control that make her body less desirable, or make her body only desirable in a very transactional situation.
Exactly. When I was watching this with Sphere said a very good point, which was the obvious thing is almost like the men who are absent from these women's lives are the men in the last real men. It's like these are the men and women who are not of the same age.
Very
they're
true.
Not interlinking. They're not overlapping.
It is actually kind of the other side.
It's a perfect puzzle piece, isn't it? They fit together. That's the women missing
Sophia.
from that film.
Thanks, we should get Sophia on this is Owen's girlfriend.
She's better at this than we are, to be honest. But
also just a female perspective, because we're always. My dad always has a go at me for not getting any women on the podcast.
Fuck it. Sorry, we try. No, we don't try at all.
We literally don't try at all.
But
I just think this is a podcast about the male gaze, and I don't really give a shit. And anyway, we're only doing this because we can't make films.
Suck on my balls.
Suck on my balls. I'm a podcaster.
That's what we do.
No, but I think, that's a great point, and I think the men are absent, and there's like a failure of the Austrian men to truly love this woman.
Because they have expectations which they aren't articulating.
I wouldn't say that about the women who didn't love the men in Last Real Men.
Because they just want to be worshipped in a way. They just want to be respected and treated like them more than... I think one of the really telling things about the Last Real Men is that the Ukrainian men are like, well, so when I was in my last wife, all she wanted to do was go discotheque, and I did not. It's like, your wife sounds fucking great. Like, I want to meet your wife. Your wife sounds amazing. Or she wants to go to discotheque and drink and go and party and whatever. It's great. And you wanted a mother to wash your clothes and do your dishes. And the women,
but they neglect themselves by not having the idea that two people who are in a relationship could pursue their own interests. He neglects himself by requiring other people. But then again, I also thought when he's talking about this thing about the Austrian women, they always want to work, and when two people are working full time, they don't get to spend any time together. And I did think, actually, this is
lockdown.
This is quite
see how that works out, lads. You Austrian fuck.
No, but I think it's a pretty good critique of an overworked capitalist society. I don't think it's ideal for a couple for a domestic couple to both be working full time,
never see each other,
and therefore never see each other. That's not an argument in favor of women
or any relationship, relationship where you don't make time to build and develop that relationship over time. It's going to fail.
So there's an element of truth there, but then his solution is it involves just completely dehumanizing a Filipino woman. So right question, wrong answer.
Right question, wrong answer. I'm wary of going over an hour, but I am. There's a really interesting scene where, towards the end of the film, the women it's her birthday. It's the protagonist's birthday. Her mates at the resort bring a again the boundary. What is a sex worker? They basically bring one of the local lads through, and they're paying him to have a Fivesome.
Yeah, he is a sex worker because he is being paid officially.
He is being paid, yeah, and it's it's the most explicit at this point. Most transactional. They want to have this they have this awkward birthday Fivesome thing, and the thing is, he can't get aroused. They can't get him to have an erection because he's just not aroused by the situation, because it's uncomfortable for him. And I think part of that is the acting, because I was reading there's an interview with him in The Guardian from it's about 7-8 years ago, but he's saying, he said that he had to do this scene a couple of times. He did it one day, and he said people were really uncomfortable, so he said, right, we're doing it again, we're shooting the whole thing again the next day. And you see the glitz behind.
What happened? Did he get a raging erection the first time? And they were like, no, this wasn't.
No, I think nothing. I think it just didn't work. I think it just didn't work at all. The scene really didn't work. I
imagine I see a scene like that, and I'm like, how many directors can get a scene like that? It's pretty extraordinary. It's very. It's both very intimate and very unintimate. And it's requires a lot of everyone involved, I think. I have, as a director, I have huge respect for someone who can conjure up that.
Well, can I, if I read this bit, he says, surely he must warn them about the demanding nature of the material. These films feature intensely intimate scenes, even if they stop short of unsimulated sex, blah, blah, blah. They know what to expect, he says, though he concedes that knowing about a scene and shooting it are different things. A protracted scene near the end of Love, Paradise, in which a group of women maul a young Kenyan man before mocking him for his failure to become aroused, was especially difficult for the cast to perform. The women were not open enough. The next night I made them do it all over again. His tone is faintly headmasterly. And then he continues, no wonder Marguerite Seidl, who plays Teresa, who's the main character in Love, Paradise, observed that Seidl uses a stick with greater frequency than a carrot. Actors need the stick, chuckles the director, pulling a bottle from the fridge behind me and splashing wine into our glasses. If they have the slightest inhibition or censorship in their heads, it won't work. So we talked last week about Fassbinder and others about the director as dictator. I mean, Seidl is aware of that, and he's aware of the power dynamic, and the discomfort of this scene is something which is also experienced by the actors. We know it is a fabrication, the discomfort. What did you get from that scene?
A raging stiffy. I'm joking.
Because I want to hear what you have to say about this scene and the final scene, because I think these may be the two most interesting scenes in the film. Like, what are your thoughts about this?
Piss. So can I do that and then I'll...
So do I. Should we hold it?
Yeah, let's go piss.
All right.
Be back, Owen.
Hello again.
Oh my god, our pisses took
so
exactly the same amount of
I
time.
did get a beer out of the fridge.
I literally just came back.
That's good.
YouTube Unplugged.
Yeah.
So tell me.
I won't include this bit, but I'm so tempted to. Maybe I will.
This is about the discomfort of the viewer.
If you've got this far
listener,
in the podcast, then I think you're cool with that sort of informality. We love the listeners.
We love it.
Listeners. Ask me the question.
So, how did you? What do you feel? This kind of there's two final scenes. There is the kind of fivesome, and then there's her final kind of encounter with a man in the film, which is kind of a coda of the film. So tell me what you think these kind of say, what Seidl is saying with these,
the scene with the guy from the bar,
yeah,
who sort of refuses in the
when
end.
She has
kind
a
of agrees
reverse
and then
Damascene
refuses.
moment,
yeah. I think the scene that was most memorable for me was the Fivesome scene, and a lot of it is quite funny. There are these sort of devices such as first person to get him hard, can fuck him, and then he only gets sort of half hard. His penis is sort of like wobbling a bit by its own accord, but not stiff enough to insert, and he doesn't really speak English, so he's not really privy to these comments about him. No, sorry, German. He can't speak German, so he's not really privy to these comments about these very insulting comments about him, and he's sort of smiling along.
We'll be dead before he gets hard.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Nothing is gonna kill your vibe more than that.
But he's smiling as if. First of all, he's smiling because he's being paid to smile, and secondly, he's smiling without a full awareness of the situation, without maybe an awareness that he's expected to get aroused, because, in a way, why would he, in that situation? But of course, women can fake orgasms, men can't fake
an orgasm, but you can't fake a stiffy.
Exactly, except with I guess Viagra, but. It's not. That's not really the point. The point is I suppose I'm just talking very generally. Male desire is kind of has this very very visible involuntary nature, which is just most prostitutes are bottoms, whether they're women or men. That penetration is. It's the kind of initiator of desire. So these women are at a loss really to initiate something when it's theirs to lose. They lose it.
And he literally cannot fill their holes And I said earlier, figuratively, literally, he cannot. Like, that's it. It's kind of the perfect
But it's
metaphor
so uncomfortable.
for this
I mean, I was watching. I was like, I really wanted the scene to end. I was just like,
yeah, it's really hard to.
I felt like I was like scared that like one of my flatmates would see me watching it, and I like, which is fine because I told them all about it afterwards. But like, like it's just that the images on the screen just felt
involuntarily to see this scene. Yeah, if someone had caught you watching,
so
it.
revolting, and kind of uncomfortable, and also and then the scene later on where I think that's sort of like a more honest moment where, well, no, they're both honest, very honest moments, but like I felt slightly more reassured by the scene where she tries to get the barman to fuck her, and he says no. But yeah, there is huge discomfort in the inarticulacy of the black men because they don't speak German.
Yeah, and we don't see them on their own.
Yeah, and we don't see them in their element really.
Yeah.
Their inarticulacy in expressing, there's like, so the women have this privilege of being able to articulate and express their desire and demand their desire in a way that the men can't.
the men will feel kind of virginal in a way.
All they can say is like, oh, no, you know, or you're you know, they have very sort of blunt terms for kind of
whereas she is in a position of negotiating her sexuality in a film. You know, she's sort of like, not like that, don't squeeze me there, don't pinch me there.
Yeah,
the thing we kept laughing about.
There's that amazing scene with Mungo where she's like teaching him how to fondle her. Yeah, she's like, I am not a cat. Don't stroke me like a cat.
Yeah, don't squeeze. That hurts. If I did that to you, it hurts. It's just kind of
That was like, actually, you know what? That was where, you know, earlier I said that thing about how there's like an erotic titillation quality to it. She
was one of the things, the mother. She was the MILF almost, right?
One of the things that is titillating about some of those earlier scenes is this sense of like naughty teenage, you know, when you're like a teenager and you like kiss and fondle someone for the first time.
No, I'm a virgin, Ralph, you know that. But hopefully one of these days. Now I'm a podcaster, I hope I might lose my virginity.
It's great, you know, I have to recommend it. But yeah, like you learn, there's something sort of sexy and exciting about like teaching.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, that Neutral Milk Hotel line about, you know, when we first learned what each other's bodies were for, you know. Although that's quite like disturbing, that line. Like in its context. But like, you know, there's something sort of like, it's disturbing because it's sort of erotic, and I think like, that sort of when she's like getting her boobs out and like teaching him to touch them and stuff, there's something like quite sweet and like intimate about it, which is what makes the later scenes all the more uncomfortable, because you see this kind of glimmer of some kind of connection between these two bodies that are so separated by experience. And it's like it's irredeemable really, because of the level of power involved. Yeah,
and but it is there, and it's like, you know, said the final scene where she fully embodies that, and she kind of adopts the persona of the transactional person, which is not what she wants actually, you know, and she kind of gets the barman into her room, and a man earlier who they were literally talking about as a piece of meat, and this super incredibly racist scene where they're kind of describing him as like a piece of bacon, and it's awful. And he doesn't understand English, or pretends he doesn't. I'm pretty sure he gets the gist that they're laughing at him. She gets him in the room.
I think there's a lot of pretending to not.
There's a lot of pretending of like dumbing down your understanding. Yeah, considering these men seem to speak conversational English and German, you know, alongside their own language, is, you know, they're privy to what's going on, but they are they are, you know, he comes into the room and she wants him to basically go down on him, and he won't. He's like, no, I don't want to.
I mean, from an anthropological perspective, actually, the way that they use their ignorance is like a great sort of what is it, sort of like weapons of the weak, you know. It's like his
subaltern politics, isn't it? It's very powerful, because he's like actually like you said, uses his ignorance to not do something he's uncomfortable with, and then she cries. The end of the film is really her crying, because she realizes that she probably feels a lot of shame and guilt about that. interaction. It's pretty amazing. It's a difficult film to watch. It's quite boring. Like, his camera is
when it's not horrific and uncomfortable. It's boring.
It's boring.
However, we like this film.
However, Seidl is really interesting. He's really important. He's such a good, like, Werner Herzog is a palate cleanser which says a lot, because but Werner Herzog is, I kind of lump these two guys together, I think, because they've got a similarity of kind of seeking out the freaks. Let's use the word freak. We're going to use it liberally, but people who want something that's, all of the people in these films are extreme in some way or another. Herzog might be a bit more particular. It's the guy that is trying to tame bears or whatever, or people who have decided to live in the Arctic. Here it's a bit more mundane and banal. But there's a similarity between them, and he is seeking out freaks.
Speaking of Herzog, his endorsement quote for Animal Love, which is "Never before have I looked so directly into hell," which, coming from Herzog, is like, whoa, wow,
mate,
man.
shit.
Talk about the abyss staring back. And it's true, like, it is like an immensely, oh man, I was so glad I had a mate to watch it with, because it's
I'm glad I watched these films with somebody else, because I think on my own I would have felt...
That's jokes that you watched Paradise Love with your girlfriend.
We're going to watch tonight. We're going to watch a really romantic, sexy film.
The text you sent me was so funny as well, where you were like... you just couldn't bear it. I felt quite sort of sadistic because I'd seen it. I was like, it's just going to get worse.
I always think about that scene in Ben Rivers' film, Spell to Ward Off the Darkness, which is like...
Oh yeah, I haven't seen it.
The best Ben Rivers film. Like, I have a... difficult relationship.
Does he go to, like, Africa and try and fuck some people? No. He's, like, white privilege.
I have a difficult relationship with Ben Rivers, because I want to like Ben Rivers. I like what he does, and I think with Spell Towards Darkness, which is one of his more commercial films, he hits the kind of tuning fork really well. It's about, like with a lot of his films, people living at the edge of society. 2 Years at Sea being the famous embodiment of that, but 2 Years at Sea is very boring. Spell to the Ward of the Darkness has a scene where there's this commune, and there's a guy describing an orgy that happens at a commune, and it's this kind of like nerdy guy that's talking about suddenly becoming aware that he's being fucked up the arse, and they're talking about the next day and the kind of cold hard light of day, and the tawdriness of it kind of comes through. It's remarkable. It's a really remarkable scene. It's like it's surprisingly moving for a filmmaker that I never really expected to be moved by. Kind of, I find Ben Rivers kind of intellectually really interesting, but like kind of emotionally a bit flat. But Spell to Ward of Darkness is great. That scene is really interesting.
I'd like to see it.
The final scene of because it's about one guy. Technically, it's kind of about one guy, who's Robert Aubrey Lowe, and in the final scene, this guy is kind of reintegrated in society, and the final scene is about him performing with his metal band. It's an amazing emotional roller coaster of 100 minutes or so. It's amazing, but that scene, the kind of tawdriness of that scene, always reminds me of this kind of cinema, and it shows you it can be very poetic and be very beautiful, and it tells you a lot about kind of very universal feelings like need and love. Like, what we might shy away from what Seidl is showing, we might sidle away from it, but what he's actually talking about are really universal things. Need, the desire to be seen and acknowledged and loved. Very universal stuff.
Yeah, I feel it's in the same spirit as with John Waters, where, like a kind of, or just generally like a kind of cabaret where the clown, ultimately, the sad clown or the sort of freakish clown, you identify, you're sort of slightly reassured that someone has it worse off than you, but you're also like lifted up by the fact that someone can be in an abject position and sort of empower themselves. And there's something like, I guess, about watching these freakish people in these desperate abject situations, where it takes a bit of adjusting to, and I think my own judgment clouded me and prevented me from seeing the good in Seidl. And also, I think Import Export is a bad film. I still maintain that. But
Yeah.
I was put off by his work, by his subject matter for quite a while.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until now, at a stage in my life where I'm like, I'm doing exposure response prevention therapy as well, which is kind of like all about exposing yourself to things that make you uncomfortable in a kind of like deliberate, controlled way, so that you become less avoidant. And it fits so well with that, and it's actually it's like sincere and tender in that way. So yeah, I give Seidl. I don't know if I want to watch his films for a while.
No,
but I really enjoyed watching them this last week, and I think he's actually one of the good ones.
He's one of the good ones.
You know.
Should we do something next week that's a bit more less abject?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think
it'll be your suggestion.
I think we might do Ben Rivers. That's it.
Ben Rivers. That's
we're
a good
doing
idea.
Spelled Wall of the Darkness.
Okay, great.
Let's do Ben Rivers. I think if we do Ben
That
Rivers,
fell into place.
then we do Ben Rivers, and we do a couple of Ben Rivers films.
Okay.
To be decided.
I've never really got into him. I met him once.
Yeah, I've met him as well.
Everyone's
met Ben Rivers.
Never really got into him.
He's a very small man. He's very short.
Yeah. Nice hairdo.
Nice hairdo. I went to a talk with Ben Rivers, like, I think it was like Camden Arts Centre about like 4 years ago or something. And he's not very good at talking about his own films. He's a very, very super shy guy, in my experience with him, who's got an aesthetic that I love. And
can we do sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go on. But I think let's do Spelled Wall of the Darkness and Slow Action and 2 Years at Sea. We could do a triple bill of Ben Rivers, or we could just do
that one he did with Gabriel Abrantes.
Which one is that? He's done about 50 films, mate. I don't.
Gabriel Abrantes and what's his face? Ben Rivers. It's like a kind of weird AI adaptation of the Arabian Nights, The Hunchback.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, if I can get a copy of, it's like half an hour. If I can get a copy of that,
let's do that. Also, Slow Action is really short.
Okay,
cool. Okay, Ben Rivers is decided. It is so.
In other news, I just noticed that L'Aventura is on Mubi, so I feel like maybe we must do that.
We have to do the classics. Also, we can't.
Also, there's a Stan Brakhage Daniel Neofito episode.
There is
coming up at some point. We don't know when we're going to do that, but that's there.
I'm also in discussions with a couple of people who might be interested in guesting as well. So there's stuff to come, basically. So
more men, of course.
More men.
Conforming with our policy that you must be a horrendous.
Well, women
leery.
can't watch films.
You must be like a character in an Ulrich Seidl film to appear on this podcast.
It's true. That's right.
But yeah, also I'd love to review Catherine Bryat. We might get a guest on.
We're building up a bit of a list here. So, you know, MoveTube is going nowhere, just as we're going nowhere.
Just as the COVID-19 situation is continuing to be a situation.
Yeah, it's getting, it's fine. We've been doing this almost a year, so
episode 40. Shout out to that.
Yeah, fuck me. Ooh.
Well, let's round it off. It was a great episode.
Love it.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Auf Wiedersehen.
And Auf Wiedersehen, pets.